Okay, hi guys, I'm Samantha Lund, I'm a senior here at Tufts. Due to the weather conditions, we're going to have our first panelist speak right now. It's Dr. Springborg. He is Professor of National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School. Actually, Dr. Springborg, you're just going to come right up here and speak, if you want. I'm just going to give a brief bio while everybody is shuffling around.
Hold on, let's get perspective. Our crowd is leaving. If you're obliged to, we'd like you to do that with dispatch, and hopefully we'll have time to stay and hear the last portion of our panel.
Thank you, Sharon. So again, this is Dr. Springborg. He's a professor of National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School. He sent me a 24-page CV, but I'm going to save some time here and just say that he worked for USAID's Democratization in the Middle East program. He was a director for a consultant firm focusing on the Middle East, a director of the American Research Center in Egypt, and he's a frequent commentator and analyst in the Middle East. He's written many books and many articles. So Dr. Springborg, the snowstorm comes.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Samantha, for all the taxi dollars are being important. I'm catching an international flight. I shall be quick and to the point. And to connect entrepreneurial behavior to education, we only have to look around here to see the sort of unique setting in which education underpins an entrepreneurial mentality, and to compare what the situation is in the MENA. Were we sitting in the equivalent situation in the MENA, believe you me, it would not be bottom-up like this. It would not be student-driven, it would be professor-driven, it would be president-driven. Top-down situation, the subjects we're discussing here would not be discussed in this open way anywhere in the Arab MENA at least, and I'll leave the other things aside for the moment. So the two things are connected, and this exemplifies the sort of spirit that Tufts, I think, exemplifies extremely well, but which is characteristic of the United States more than any other country with which I'm familiar, and I've taught in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and so on. So it's quite unique here, and you don't appreciate, I think, how unique it is. Many of you from other countries will be familiar with that, and so you know entrepreneurial behavior doesn't come easily. It's a process, and education has to underpin it or it's not going to happen. So that's the first message. Second message is that you, because I've got to catch a flight, you're being saved a short course in development economics. And the short course is based on, in a sense, the EEE. How would you structure our panel? It's called Education, Entrepreneurship, and Economic Development. So what's left out here? If it's E plus E equals the last E, economic development, what are we missing in terms of the performance of the emerging economies, which are performing at about 2.5 times the rate of the performance of developed economies? What's being left out are a couple of things. One, the demographic gift, the younger age of emerging economies. Secondly, much higher savings and investment rates. They are saving approximately double the amount that the developed world is saving. And just to give you an idea about the MENA in that context, MENA countries are averaging right now less than 15%. They're even behind us, and we're not doing very well at all. Egypt is currently saving about 12% of GDP, and investing in Turkey, even rich Turkey, about 14%. So way behind. Now the third thing, and what the short course in economics was going to be here, was about technology. That's the third and most important factor in catch-up by the emerging world. And technology in development economics is now come down to so-called total factor productivity. And that includes entrepreneurial behavior. So I wanted to just now sort of go back. We won't go through the short course. I want to tell you a little bit about the performance more generally, and then talk briefly about education and entrepreneurial behavior. Okay, so the MENA is the slowest growing region in the world. It was announced 3 days ago that the catastrophic result of the last quarter in the United States, when we were expecting so much better performance, was a growth rate of 2.4% GDP per annum. That's exactly the growth rate in the last year in the MENA. So we say, okay, well, the MENA is doing as well as the United States, not so bad. There are two problems here. First, it's about 1/3 the rate of the average in emerging economies. And secondly, the population growth rate of the MENA is approximately double that of the United States. So it means it's a half GDP per capita of the United States growth rate. So it's not doing well. As is manifested by a very high unemployment rate. The unemployment rate in the MENA is now the highest in the emerging world. And what's also paradoxical in this is that the lovely measure of government overreach is that of public employment. The MENA is distinguished by spending the highest percentage of its GDP on public sector wages. That's 10% of GDP in the MENA as a whole goes on public sector wages. So not only does it have the highest unemployment rate in the world, it has the highest expenditure on keeping people in government jobs that basically do nothing. So yeah, there are serious problems in the development trajectory of the MENA. Education. There are two measures of education, input and output. The input measures for education in the MENA, in theory, are not so bad. The MENA is spending a reasonable amount on education. So it's a question of how is it spending it and what is it spending for. It's not doing well. The proportion of expenditures on administration, for example, is extremely high. In Egypt, there are more administrators than teachers in the Ministry of Education, if that's imaginable. There's a greater expenditure on tertiary than primary education by a ratio that is counterproductive. There is a misallocation of expenditures by discipline. There is too little in science and mathematics and far too much in the sort of soft things that most of us here work in. The syllabi and the teaching methods are, for the most part, out of date and inappropriate. So the inputs, more or less across the board, are, although quantitatively not so bad, qualitatively are poor. The outputs are increasingly easy to measure because they are being measured. You're probably familiar with the TIMSS, Trends in Math and Science exams that are being administered globally. On the TIMSS tests, Arab education ranks very poorly, not at the bottom, but it ranks poor. Other measures, publications, faculty, patents in all sectors of society. The graduation rates, which are poor, and the graduation disciplines, as I say, overemphasize non-science and math. And finally, a good measure of the quality of education is what happens when people graduate. Are they welcomed by the firms which hire them and put to work, or is there a question about the quality? And basically, right across the Arab world, serious questions about the quality of graduates and need for them to actually be trained, and more than trained, sort of substantively educated in the fields, which is reported by a whole variety of World Bank surveys of the response by managers to new employees. So where does that leave us with entrepreneurship? Well, unfortunately, you shouldn't have me here. You should have my colleague, Robert E. Looney, who's a development economist in Naval Postgraduate School. And for the past several years, Bob has been studying entrepreneurial behavior on various grants from the Department of Defense. Now, why the DoD is doing this is not clear to me, nor to Bob, but nevertheless, the money's there and he's doing it. And what did he find? One, it's the most important factor in development, which reinforces the work of just about everybody else working on total factor productivity. It's not the factors of production, it's not land, labor, and capital. It's the management of that that's absolutely critical. It's an entrepreneurial behavior that's critical. So that's Bob's first finding. Bob's second finding, unfortunately, is the MENA has the lowest rate of entrepreneurial behavior of any of the emerging regions. And you can measure it. And he does it in a variety of ways. Probably the most important one is firm density. And this is the World Bank measure. The firm density in the MENA is 0.6. The firm density in the emerging world, in the developed world on average, is 4.1. It's 7 times lower. You're 1/7 of the number of business enterprises in the MENA as there are in the developed world. The age of managers. What's the average age of a manager in the Arab world? It is the highest level of any of the categories, that is to say the regions, measured by the World Bank. It's an aging, sort of sclerotic state-dominated economy or a crony capitalist economy. It's the so-called hollow middle. You have a plethora of small firms. About 75% of new firms created in Egypt, for example, are informal. They are not registered firms. And there's a very strong negative correlation between informality and total factor productivity. The higher the degree of informalism in an economy, the lower the degree of total factor productivity, the less effective the management is. So informal and small. What is all this to say? Well, let's say there is trouble here. The MENA is lagging behind in the rest of the world in its development. It is going to take a long time to fix this. This is an educational process. Think about it. It's a generational phenomenon. It's not going to happen overnight. The consequences we have already seen. It is the Arab Spring. That's why we're here. The best measure I saw, the correlational studies of the outbreak of Arab Springs in different countries, was based on the conception of the satisfaction or dissatisfaction of the middle class. And the more dissatisfied Arab middle classes were, the more likely there was to be rebellion in those countries. So the failure of economic development, which affects primarily the security of this middle class, which can either go for the regime or for the opposition, caused them to tilt in many places for the opposition. Coming up is what we are beginning to see in Egypt, that the Arab Spring, which could have been called a bourgeois revolution had it succeeded, is now being followed by a, quote, proletarian revolution in a variety of different ways, the indicators being that the dissatisfaction is moving down in the social order and leading to a more fundamental challenge to the state, not just the regimes, but to the states, and especially Egypt, where this is particularly notable. So the consequences of a political sort are extremely severe. They've already caused massive disruption, and they can cause yet more. But finally, there's an existential threat, and the existential threat has to do with the particular nature of the MENA economy. It is based on the importation of food, which is virtual water. If you have any idea of the relative water content of what you eat, most food items are 90% water and above. So the MENA is the shortest, it has the least water resources of any region in the world. It has been capable of staving off that problem by virtue of importation of food, virtual water. And that in turn has been based on the hydrocarbon productivity of that region and the wealth that the hydrocarbons have brought. Well, that equation of oil for food is coming to an end. The relative productivity of Middle Eastern oil fields, Middle East gas fields, the relative return is stagnating. There is little likelihood that the growth in prices and the relativities between food prices and hydrocarbon prices is going to continue to favor the MENA. In the meantime, there are now 325 million Arabs. And so the food dependency has grown greater and greater. The most food-dependent country in the world is Egypt. The most food-dependent region in the world is the MENA. And all of this has been made possible by hydrocarbons, not by economic growth more generally driven by productivity. It's rental income, basically, and the rents are now going down. So the MENA is facing a huge, huge problem. It's facing an immediate political problem that has disrupted economic processes, and it's facing this sort of existential threat to its well-being based on its inability to match the economic need to import food with the resources generated by hydrocarbons. So I hate to leave you with that happy note here and run off and let you wrestle with that problem. But it is a very serious problem. This is going to cause this region of the world to be the continued cockpit of conflict for years to come. It's not going away, it's going to get worse. With that happy note, I shall wish you all the very best.
All my other panelists have left me, just me and these two, this afternoon for our last panel. But good afternoon and welcome to the last panel of this year's symposium. Like I said, I'm Samantha Lund and I'll be moderating this panel. So over the course of this year, our EPIIC class has been studying the MENA region from many angles. We've discussed religion and history, gender roles, nuclear weapons, and many, many other topics. Yet in every category, the Arab Spring and current events moved over our discussions. One repeated issue brought up time and time again in the context of the Arab Spring and the general instability of the region is the lack of jobs and economic growth. We've seen how economic issues can be a catalyst for major social and political changes, and the region is still grappling with it today. There have been incredible reports and programs generated by various domestic and international people and organizations to address the issue. These panelists have storied careers which span many, many areas, all have accomplished an incredible amount in the field of education, entrepreneurship, and economic development, and that they've seen some incredible results. So you all have heard a lot about Questscope and their education initiatives and how they are part of connecting education to economic health. In our class, we've read many books by Stephen Coltai, Christopher Schroeder, and many, many World Bank reports my classmates can attest to. And we've often discussed how entrepreneurship, mostly in the form of public and private partnerships, is really critical for this region. However, also as part of this symposium, I've been lucky enough to be part of the Voices from the Field meetings. And in these, we've discussed the actual transient nature of such public and private partnerships and the need for more collaboration and policy-driven programs. I hope the panels can discuss what economic initiatives the United States should pursue, as well as what activities should be pursued in the region. So here, I have my final two panelists that are left. This is Perihan AbouZeid, the co-founder and CEO of Qabila Media Productions, and Muthanna Khreisat, of the Jordan Country Director of Questscope. So each panelist you'll have however long you want, say like 12 minutes, and then you can give your presentations and you'll have some audience questions. So our first panelist we're going to have right now will be Perihan AbouZeid. She's the founder and CEO of Qabila Media Productions in Egypt. Qabila volunteers create informing media and about political and social issues. The creators collaborate on all portions of the production, and the final products range from documentaries to music videos to cartoons. She is currently a Legatum Fellow at MIT. In 2012, she was awarded the MIT Enterprise Forum for Best Female Entrepreneur, and Qabila has been selected as one of the top startups. The floor is yours.
So I understand that I'm the one, or basically this panel stands between you and going home, so I'll try to be brief and informative as much as I can. Being an entrepreneur myself, Qabila actually is not the first startup that I did. This is the third attempt to be an entrepreneur, and or basically I started 3 companies, and I've learned throughout my experience that it all starts from education, which is no surprise that we have education as part of this panel as well. So just as was introduced earlier, there's a huge problem with spending or what we're learning in school and everything. But I personally believe that the problem has to, when it comes to education, has to do with political will. Because when you think of education, the spending, obviously, and maybe I can also Covert's concept of truthiness here, is that the spending is increasing, the enrollment in schools in the Middle East is actually increasing, but the problem is that the learning level is not by any means getting any better. And that is not a problem of resources, not a problem of money, because when you look at Qatar, for instance, more than 50% of the population or students are not meeting the learning thresholds compared to different students around the world. So the problem is definitely not with money. The problem has a lot to do with what we're learning in schools, and it goes beyond the textbook curriculum that we're getting. So it's not just like, what we're learning in terms of science and math or even economics. It has a lot to do with also the skills that we're acquiring in school. So for instance, I went to private schools all my life, and I never, learned anything that has to do with teamwork, or anything that has to, I learned that by playing basketball, or anything that has to do with leadership. There is no such thing as student governments in schools and high schools, and definitely in universities there always an apparatus of the government or the regime that's ruling. There is no such thing as analytical skills learning. So it's actually it's not just coming as a surprise to a lot of the Arab people here, but being analytical is often frowned upon in the Middle East or in the Arab world. So if you question your teacher, if you question your parent, or if you question anybody who is of higher status than you, then you're being rude and disrespectful to these people. So obviously people or students kind of stop thinking too much, so they don't have a lot of unanswered questions, and that obviously affects their creativity and affects their analytical ability, and that actually reflected in what we saw post-revolutions in the Arab world, is that we noticed, and specifically in Egypt, you can see now that people sort of like hate each other because they're not used to discussing things and having opposing opinions and respect each other. There's no such thing as debate societies, for instance, in schools. So I believe that it all starts definitely from education, and it's about the skills that we're acquiring more than even the knowledge that we're gaining. But also, yes, and that is extremely related to entrepreneurship and the level of entrepreneurship. I think it has a lot to do with the entrepreneurial behavior, because obviously when we don't have the skills, such skills that are extremely important to become a successful entrepreneur, you are not able to become an entrepreneur or even have that as an option. But at the same time, I believe there is a lot to blame on the ecosystem, or the economic ecosystem, and also the entrepreneurial, and specifically entrepreneurial ecosystem in the region. So to give you a bit of sense of what's going on specifically in Egypt, I'll give you some examples from my experience. So my second startup was an online supermarket, and so obviously it was an e-commerce, and that was in 2010. 2009, 2010, and the funny thing, I could not register or incorporate as an e-commerce business because there is no such thing as e-commerce law. So I had to incorporate the business as a grocery store, physical grocery store. I thought, since there is no law, there's nothing that's going to be against me, so I can incorporate that way. And I was able to, but soon after I started, I realized that I could not collect any payments online because I did not exist as an online business. And when I tried to work with the banks, they told me that there is no such thing. Nobody can collect payments online. Any exchange of money has to happen through banks. And that's another thing that we still suffer from to this day. Crowdfunding, for instance, is considered illegal in Egypt and in so many other countries. So definitely the legal infrastructure is not in any way friendly or to entrepreneurs. Also, there's a lot of sort of impediments that exist as well. So I don't know how many of you know this, but if you run any business, or if you're trying to run any business that has to do with dissemination of information or ideas, so anything that's on the internet or anything that's like media related, like magazines or production companies like Qabila, you have to get an approval from the national security. So that is again extremely difficult, and that can last to 100 years. So if the revolution did not happen, Qabila would have not existed. So we took advantage. At the same time, there is no investor-friendly environment as well. So investors basically are not encouraged to come. They don't get any benefits for investing in Egypt, like any tax benefits or anything else actually. And so basically, investors are not encouraged to invest here, foreign or local. And at the same time, there's also no programs or anything that has to do with capacity building for entrepreneurs. There are some programs that are starting to promote entrepreneurship, and mostly in the form of business plan competitions, which I believe is the wrong mechanism to actually promote entrepreneurship. I personally believe that you need to create the right environment for entrepreneurship, then entrepreneurs will rise, and that has to do with the ecosystem and also introducing it in the schools. Yeah, I'll stop here and take any questions.
Our next panelist is Muthanna Khreisat. He is the Jordan Country Director for Questscope, and he joined Questscope in 1999 as a volunteer. Since then, he has dedicated his work to helping create social, educational, and entrepreneurial opportunities for marginalized youth. His extensive experience and dedication to furthering positive change in the MENA region led to his appointment as Jordan Country Director in 2010. Mr. Khreisat has responsibility for program design and institutional relationships with governmental agencies, including the Ministries of Education and Social Development and the Department of Public Security. He also oversees relations with UN agencies for initiatives with Syrian refugees and vulnerable Jordan youth, including UNICEF, UNESCO, and UNODC.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be in the EPIIC Symposium for the first time, and I want to thank everyone behind the big success happened in this event. As my colleague said, that I'll try to be straightforward and try to make a presentation short. I know everyone here, someone said that I will do it very short, then he said that he will stay forever, but I promise that I will be short. So I will be focused in the education in the Syrian crisis, and I will focus on two main issues related to the education in the Syrian crisis. The first one is there is a huge number of refugees, as we heard from the previous presentations and from previous speakers. They are refused and displaced in different countries. And the second one, that essentially there is no learning options for the kids that they are on the school age and the Syrians. So the Syrian crisis caused millions of Syrians that they are refugees and displaced in all the countries around Syria and also inside Syria. And that's caused hundreds of thousands of kids on the school age that they have to have access to education. This is something that is very, very, very important and very dangerous, because they are refugees in countries that they built their education system or their formal system in a way to digest the citizen in this country and not built to be working in emergencies. So what we will do in this case, some people said that let's build the new schools. Building the new schools will take a long time and it's need a huge cost to build those schools. And we have to think what will happen after the crisis. So if we will build extra schools and then the crisis finished and the Syrians go home, so maybe this will collapse the educational system in the countries that they host the refugees. The second one is the educational options. The educational options is very limited because any educational system have its own problems and own challenges, and it's built for normal students. In Syria, in the Syrian crisis, we are talking about, and maybe Dr. Rhodes, he talked about the pain and the experience that the adults face during their trip from Syria. So what we are talking about, the refugees themselves. So we have to deal with them in a special way. And the problem that all the solutions for any kind of relief problem is we have to do something happened before, or let's try others' experience. Every crisis has its own experience that we have to try to fit within it. To solve this problem, I think we have a great resource, which is the Syrian teachers, that they are refugees now. Because there is a highly educated Syrians, they are become refugees now. So the thing that we are thinking about is how we can reorient those teachers and train them so they can be part of the solution. All the relief organizations and the people that working with refugees, they deal with refugees as a problem. So why we don't change this and try to deal with them as a part of the solution? Because they know the needs of the students. They know how we have to deal with those kids. They know the pain because they have the same experience during their trip from Syria to the host country. I think that all the systems and all the government, all the organization believe that the formal education is the only solution. But I think in the Syria crisis, I don't think this will happen. It will be a very painful thing to start thinking in this direction, because I think the formal education is no longer being the solution. That we have some schools that they doing double shifting, and we have expansion for the schools, and we have schools inside the camps. Okay, how much students that we educate now? Let's say 10%, 15%, 20% of hundreds of thousands. So we have hundreds of thousands left without any opportunity of education. If you will keep the kid outside of education, they have nothing to do. They are in a country different than their life. We found that a lot of those kids that they spend their time at home, watching the news, see violence videos on YouTube, and that will create more violence inside them. So how we will prevent them from being something, to do something bad in the future. I have one of the cases that we have a focus group, and one of our colleagues, he asked the Syrians, and he asked one of the Syrians, what you want to be in the future? Sorry. So the thing that, when he asked him what you don't to be in the future, he said that I hope I will bigger very soon and be armed and go to Syria to kill the people that they killed my family and destroy my house. And when he asked, do you know those people? He said, no, I don't know, but I will find them. So we are talking about a new generation that raised on violence, that raised on the we have to kill each other. So finally, I will say that we all have to increase the efforts and put our hands together to have an educated generation of Syrians, that they can rebuild Syria in the future instead of being part of unraveling Syria. Thank you.
And I have two presentations from several of my peers in the EPIIC class this year. Our first one will be from Bradley Friedman and Adam Hickey about the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Tunisia 3 years after the Arab Spring. Adam is a junior studying international relations and environmental studies. At Tufts, he's a member of the Student Senate and is an active member of the APIIC program. Adam hopes to pursue a career in water policy. Bradley, much like Dr. Springborg, provided me with a very extensive bio, and I'm going to summarize it as briefly as I can. He is a junior studying international relations with a concentration in economic development and is pursuing a minor in entrepreneurship studies. This is Bradley's second time doing EPIIC as he was a member in 2012 Conflict in the 21st Century Colloquium. In addition to conducting research in Tunisia, Bradley studied abroad in Israel in high school and interned with the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs this past summer with the State Department in Washington, D.C. On campus, Bradley is also a student senator and is a founding member of the 180 Degrees Consulting Tufts branch, a student-run consultancy that provides pro bono consulting services for nonprofits. Gentlemen, are you ready?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. Great. Good afternoon. Thank you guys for all sticking with us. I know the weather's not looking too great. Before we begin, Bradley and I would really like to thank Sherman and Heather and the IGL for making this all possible. We would also like to thank the Institutional Review Board for facilitating our research methodology and helping us come up with the right questions to ask. And finally, we'd like to thank our family and friends who are here, and of course, our parents who allowed us to go. That was probably the most difficult part of our trip. Bradley and I were in Tunis between December 31st and January 11th, which, as Ms. Anderson really beautifully explained, was also when they were writing the Constitution. So her speech really did resonate with us. During this time, we conducted roughly 20 interviews in order to gain a clearer picture of the entrepreneurial ecosystem of Tunisia. In our class, we were fortunate enough to both read and have the authors of these two books come to our class, David Rode and Christopher Schroeder. Both of them wrote books arguing that entrepreneurship would create jobs and stability needed in these new democracies. So we based our initial hypothesis off of these readings and these ideas. We chose Tunisia because of its promise and relative stability, but also because Bradley made very important connections last summer while he was interning at the State Department, meeting a young Tunisian entrepreneur, Saifala, who was just launching a company called Clean Phosphates. We thought that his company would be an amazing case study for how entrepreneurship was functioning in the wake of the revolution. However, when we got to Tunisia, we realized that the situation on the ground was far different than what we had read about in the books mentioned before. Saifala had hit a wall. Despite victories in numerous Western-funded business competitions, despite a very strong business plan and a really good idea, which we won't reveal because it's such a good idea, there were major structural impediments to both his and other Tunisian entrepreneurs' success. These were, first and foremost, the system of crony capitalism that Dr. Springborg alluded to, which during Ben Ali produced a generation without either experience or confidence in their entrepreneurial skills. More alarmingly was a tradition of dependency on the state, which manifested itself in entrepreneurs still looking to the state for both funding and guidance.
A second issue is what we call foreign aid mismatch. And so the impact of aid, we found, exacerbated these structural problems that Adam spoke about, and in many ways just wasn't the most effective solution they could provide. And when I talk about aid here, I'm referring to entrepreneurship program related aid, and usually mostly funded by the West and Qatar to an extent. So Adam discussed this idea of a tradition of dependency, and so just to clarify a little more, from birth through university and healthcare, everything is provided by the state in Tunisia. And so after the revolution, unemployment increased because students weren't getting any more jobs from the public sector. But we found that students and youth in Tunisia were relying more and more on the West in these aid programs to kind of provide them jobs and funding. And so what we found was, rather than focusing on the goals of these programs, which were to start companies and get skills, that youth were competing to get access to this influx of money. And in many ways, in one of our interviews, we had a case where the person was using this just to stack his resume so that he can go travel to the United States and Europe for these conferences. Another thing we found when we met with the legal counsel for the Qatar Friendship Fund, which promised to give $100 million just for entrepreneurship funding, was that it was pretty shocking because he wanted to support this innovative startups, yet the way that the funds would be dispersed is through one large national bank in Tunisia, BTE. And in order to qualify for funding, you have to go to the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research and fulfill this checklist of innovation. So in order to be qualified for innovative funds, you have to go to this checklist in order to get funds. So it was pretty shocking. So this is Ali Manif, one of the entrepreneurs we met, and he best exemplifies the core reason why we changed our hypothesis, and that was because when he interviewed us, he talked about his experience, and he's a serial entrepreneur, and he was able to get a fellowship to the United States to explore the Silicon Valley and Boston, which are considered successful entrepreneurial ecosystem. And what he discovered was that these universities, in these cities, there's universities that train highly qualified students, and then there's this ecosystem of incubators, venture capital, mentorship. And whereas in Tunisia, the programming was focused on turning unemployed into entrepreneurs. I mean, you can't just turn someone unemployed into the next Steve Jobs. And that was the main thing that he emphasized, that just assuming that you could turn unemployed into entrepreneurs was not a recipe for success. And he gave us more examples. For example, a lot of these trainers in these startup programming had never started a company before. Or, and he also talked about how every week there was a startup competition, and yet there'd be a new victor, and then nothing would happen. There was no follow-through. So it was very helpful for him to kind of give us this perspective. And ironically, his program, his company, he provides. He was an event planner for organizations like the State Department and other foreign governments to provide these programs. So even though he was able to talk about this problem, in many ways perpetuating the problem because he does the exact same thing.
Yeah, his business model was essentially, all these Western aid groups want to teach people about entrepreneurship. I'm going to help them plan these events. So it was really eye-opening. However, there are definitely success stories in Tunisia. This is Nizar Mensley, who is CEO and founder of Pinhole TV. And Pinhole TV is very similar to Hulu. It's the North African version of Hulu, television and movie streaming online. And he demonstrates one of our other findings, and one of our more positive findings, which is that in the wake of the revolution, many people who went abroad returned, and many young Tunisians who would have went abroad decided to stay. And Nizar, for example, actually was in Sweden for 3 years working on smart set-top devices, and after the revolution he decided to come back to his home country and try his luck. And he was actually successful, and the reason he was successful was because when he was abroad he learned skills, and he understood that in order to be successful he would have to look towards the private sector and not rely on the state for guidance and funding. Another success story was Chema Gargouri, who is the country director of the Women's Enterprise for Sustainability, which is a program run by the Institute for International Education. Wes trains women entrepreneurs throughout Tunisia, and the key to her success is her sustainable business model. While Wes did receive a grant from a foreign NGO, they are now totally sustainable. And the way they do this is they've trained teachers and set up centers, which then charge a small fee to women to be trained in the regional offices. They then stick by these women for years, helping them at every stage, and often turning them into volunteer teachers after they have successfully started up their own businesses. And we actually traveled outside Tunis to visit one of these centers, and what was really cool was the West Regional Office was located in the same building as one of their clients' businesses, which was a language and web development workshop space where she would teach young Tunisians how to use HTML and also English and German and French. So it was really, really awesome.
So we came away from this cautiously optimistic because, well, we found all these challenges. Tunisians are adapting quickly, and so are Western organizations. For example, the State Department has a Deloitte program that recognized all these challenges and crafted this 9-month fellowship where they now take university students, have them stick with them through their whole senior year, mentoring, training with business plan, as well as pitch stuff, as well as funding when they graduate, and then they stay with them kind of like Wes for the next couple of years. So that was a really interesting program to look at. And then lastly, there's a culture change happening. Despite these huge levels of unemployment, a lot of the youth are willing to take the chance and start a company or join NGO, start an NGO. And so we came away like very impressed and, like I said, cautiously optimistic. So these were our findings. Hope they shed some light, and thank you for listening to us.
Our next presentation will be research conducted by Bahar and Katie Sadiano on the role of Tunisian youth in civil society in Tunisia's democratic transition. Katie is a freshman planning on studying international relations and Arabic from Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. And Bahar is also a freshman, born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, also planning on majoring in international relations. Her interest in the MENA region partially stems from her Iranian nationality, but also from her genuine love and interest in Naval.
Initially, Katie wasn't supposed to be here, but luckily her flight landed early, so we're very happy to be able to present our research together.
Okay, so hi, I'm Katie, and my fellow freshman Bahar, and I conducted research in Tunisia this January. So we interviewed 3 different types of demographics in the cities of Tunis and Sousse. University students, so these were people mainly 18 to 26 years old, NGO workers, and different government officials. So we're going to start with a short video clip that we filmed while in Sousse, Tunisia, a few hours away from Tunis, that features a clip of one of our interviews with a young activist.
So they have stopped the revolution. They call it political illicit. When the revolution has come, I quit my job. It was December 26th, 2010.
So the activist that you all just heard, Rami, left us off in December 2010 when he quit his job to participate in revolutionary protests. The revolution's effect on unemployment rate is clear, with unemployment rates rising from 23% in 2010 to 31% in 2011.
Because Tunisian law guarantees access to higher education to anyone who passes the high school baccalaureate exam, the number of Tunisian college graduates has actually tripled in the last 10 years alone. Unfortunately, this means that the country's educational system is producing more graduates than its job market can accommodate. So with that in mind, our research question during the preparation phase was, what role do youth play in the civil society in Tunisia's democratic transition? So throughout this presentation, we will use CSO as an acronym for civil society organization. So civil society is referring to the third sector of society, distinct from business and government. So any sort of civic engagement that we're talking about is happening with different NGOs and university organizations. So with this, we hope to give you just a flavor of some of our findings. Before we left for Tunis, we read many different post-revolution research reports and newspaper articles that left us with a few questions to ask in the field. So one of the recurring trends that we read about was the creation of thousands of different CSOs, even just 2 to 3 days after the revolution. Youth were feeling very discluded and disenchanted by the rigidity of different traditional political parties, and this prompted the creation of lots of different CSOs in the field.
So I'm going to talk you through some of Katie and I's assumptions going into Tunisia. Our first assumption was that the high number of CSOs would yield a high level of government responsiveness to people's needs. But what we found was a sentiment summarized best by one of our interviewees, Ayman, a first-year college student. And he said, quote, that there are around 2,000 CSOs, but the ones that are present and have their effect on the street are less than 100. So despite the high number of CSOs, there didn't seem to be a proportionate amount of tangible change. And for this reason, it seemed like the government nearly dismissed the entire CSO sector altogether. Our second assumption was that the transitional government would be more popular than Ben Ali's regime. And while we can't qualify the opinions of an entire country, so when I say findings, I don't mean a summarization, more that whatever, when I say findings, I mean what we found that was untrue about our assumption, basically. We're not trying to make a huge generalization. But what we did find that we were surprised by was the large sanctification of Ben Ali's regime, at least in terms of people referring to their old quality of life, at least in terms of employment opportunities, which we were surprised by.
Okay, and then when we first got to Tunisia, we were very interested in the student perspective because according to the National Institute of Statistics in Tunis, 54.3% of the adult population is under the age of 30, which makes the youth vote and opinion the most influential in the country. So our two main findings after speaking to a wide variety of university students was that students really lack the opportunities to apply their education. And also students were very conscious about these limited opportunities. And this is really summed up well by Ahmed Dasali, who was a first-year university student that we interviewed. And he said, "We are smart enough to compete, but you have a bigger chance to change the world. I don't expect any Tunisian student to be able to come to the US and interview people. This is the advantage that you have. You need to use it." So now that we've talked a little bit about the CSO sector, the government response to it, and education opportunities, we'd like to talk about how all of this comes together.
So if the goal is a freer Tunisia, how can you reconcile the visions of the CSO sector and the government? It seems like there are two main limitations to this goal. The first is a discrepancy within the CSO sector. An example of this might be a CSO that advocates for a total independence of authority of all kind, competing for resources with a CSO that encourages the students to apply for jobs within the government and enact change from within. So this begs the question, is a CSO's unwillingness to engage with authority an advantage or a limitation? It is possible that the Tunisian government is dismissing the CSO sector altogether because of the lack of unity and vision within the CSO sector. A second key limitation seems to be a generational divide, in that the CSO sector is focused on youth largely because older generations are affiliated with traditional, more rigid political parties in Tunisia. Of the 217 members of Tunisia's National Constituent Assembly, most are 50 or 60 years old, the oldest one being 74. So it will be important to track the demographic shifts within the Tunisian government as we look forward. Katie and I's main takeaways from the youth perspective was one, that they're largely discontent with the current government. It's important to note that these statistics were taken in 2013 and that there may have been shifts given the newly passed constitution. But at the time, 13% of youth, being that 18 to 26 age demographic, 13% favored a second revolution, 64% will wait for the next elections, 18% prefer the returning to Ben Ali's rule. A second major takeaway was the limited opportunity to engage in change making, and there seemed to be a few key reasons for this. The first was that new institutions already had entrenched and isolating structures. And it's easy for these institutions to be rigid because they're new, but once things crystallize, it seems like they could become more moderate. The second is an ideological polarization among political parties. Katie and I found that political parties in Tunisia formed largely around the personalities of specific politicians rather than the ideologies within a specific political party. The third is the government corrupting the CSO sector with their political agendas and explicit bribery. And the fourth are that university bureaucracies can be limiting.
So, as we look forward, it's clear that Tunisia's youth will continue to channel their energy through the CSO sector. So how can we reconcile those of the CSO sector with those of the current government? And what role will you play going forward? We'd love to hear your opinions. Thank you.
Lastly, I'd like to thank the speaker Delegation of Sherman and Becker, Tufts University, for the institutional view.
I'm excited to announce that we have one more research presentation from one of
Sarah, can you pull the microphone a little closer to you?
I'm excited to announce that we have one more research presentation from one of our international student guests. Huiruo is a Peking University student studying at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. She's dedicated to strengthening China-Israel relationships and dialogue. As a fellow of Israel-Asia Leadership, she's been actively interacting with Israeli enterprises, communities, and governments, and is developing a comprehension on Israeli entrepreneurship. For this EPIIC Symposium, she interviewed Mr. Saul Singer, the author of Startup Nation, a 50-week bestseller, which has been translated into 20 languages. So please welcome Huiruo.
I thank very much for everybody that keeps sitting here in the very last minutes. My name is Huiruo, and as you know, I'm studying Israel and Chinese. So entrepreneurship, from my perspective as a foreign student, is one of the key motive force of Israel states that it can survive and thrive in all the difficult circumstances and from the outside world. So with only 20,000 square kilograms, sorry, I'm using metric in the United States, and 8 billion population, Israel is right now the 24th economic entity in the whole world, and its GDP growth rate was 4.8%, excel most of the other OECD members. And most remarkable thing to mention is that it has the world's largest venture capital per capita and the world's last startup companies per capita. There are 4,000 startups, small companies in Israel states, which means there is one startup company in every 2,000 people, which is really remarkable. And also, it has 68 listed companies in NASDAQ, only second to the United States and China. So if I can try to analyze the reasons behind all these miracles, I'd love to list three. Firstly is the tough outer circumstances that make Israel people to make best use of the human intelligence resources. And secondly, the emphasis on innovation from both education and also the army service. For example, Huiruo basically means be straightforward and be rude, which is incredible to me as a Chinese when I first got there. But the students and the soldiers are really encouraged to break the stereotype and have an innovative and creative mind. And also, when they get out of the army and the school, they can be really successful entrepreneurs and creative and smart engineers. And thirdly is the social atmosphere that is greatly supported by the government, and they do not fear about failure. For example, I've visited small companies, startup companies in the office building in Tel Aviv, and those entrepreneurs are paying only $60 per month as the rent, and they can have a very decent office for their startup team, which obviously is a demonstration of governmental support. So here I'm showing you the video, and the interviewee is the co-author of the book Startup Nation, and the book had a very in-depth look of the inner driving force of all these dynamic national image. So I hope you love it. You love it.
I'm also an alumni of Tufts University, where I took some courses at the Fletcher School. So happy to be back. I want to say about Startup Nation, about how it's been so important for Israel, and also something about how it could have an impact on the Middle East as a region. Israel has more startups than anywhere outside of Silicon Valley. And Israel's been attracting about 2.5 times as much venture capital per capita as the United States, about 30 times as much as Europe. So in effect, we're really the only economy in the world that is startup-centric. That is, it's the driving force of our economy. These thousands of small startups and hundreds of serious major research and development centers for companies like Intel, Microsoft, Google, IBM, Cisco, and so on. So this has been critical for Israel, but it's also an opportunity for the region. And we're already seeing this happen in the sense that there are investment funds in Israel, together with Americans and Europeans and others, that are investing in startups in Ramallah and the Palestinian areas. There are investment funds here that are working on startups related to the Arabic internet, which is a huge untapped opportunity throughout the Arab world. There's massive potential here for combining Israel's innovation sector with what we hope will be growing innovation sectors throughout the Arab world. And while this may not happen immediately, that there are political obstacles to making this happen. I think that the potential of this kind of cooperation is one of the most attractive and driving forces for peace in the region. And so I do think that having this potential is a big help, and that someday we might be able to realize it more fully. But in any case, already Israel on its own has been having an impact in the world through medical devices, through mobile phones, through IT, through all kinds of clean tech, water tech, nanotechnology, and so on. And again, this is something that has great potential to spread throughout the region. Thank you.
Mr. Solsinger sent his regards to EPIIC, and so do I wish every best luck to EPIIC 2014 and 2015-16. Thank you very much.
So I'd now like to ask my panelists if you have anything you'd like to say to each other about your presentations. And if not, I can open it up now to audience questions. Please keep your questions brief and direct them to one of the panelists or to our student researchers. We'll alternate either microphone.
Could the student researchers join the table, please?
Oh yeah, come on.
Hello, my name is Yasser. I'm a student here at Tufts University, and I'm part of EPIIC 2014. My question is to Ms. AbouZeid. How do you think the political system in the Arab countries played a role in suppressing these ability and innovative abilities of youth, especially with the regimes mostly putting these, making these youth very submissive to their rule and to their political system. You mentioned something about how we don't act, like the Arabs don't ask the parents when they tell them something, they just do it, and how that affected their analytical ability. How do you see that, and how do you relate it to Adam's and Bradley's presentation on how how youth is very dependent on the state? Thank you.
So I guess the answer is that yourself, and I was presenting a presentation, and basically there's definitely, there's two sides here. There's certain sort of obstacles that are placed in terms of the education system, in terms of lack of resources, but also there's the lack of encouragement in a way. So for instance, when you think of any research that's conducted in universities, it's never related, or it's never encouraged to be related to national interest. I know personally, I can name at least 10 people that started to try to conduct certain research that will help with a lot of national problems that we have, but they were told specifically to stop continuing the research just by the government. So definitely that is something that the political system, and that's why I started my talk with saying that it has a lot to do with the political will. It is again the government that's choosing to have over 500,000 administrative staff in the education ministry, a lot more than teachers, like Dr. Springborg said. I personally believe that something like the civil society can actually contribute to this, but also having expats contribute to being part of that, so that it's not dependent on the government. We have either inflows of funding, or even like capacity building programs where those startups, in my personal experience when I came here, even before I started my school, when I came here, I learned a lot about being able to start a business, things that I was not exposed to back home, and I don't think that would ever happen as part of the government's program, or because there is no political will. When you have an empowered society, when you have an educated society, it becomes too strong for you to control it as a dictatorship. So definitely I don't expect anything to happen on the government side.
Just one note that the Arab societies are pretty educated, but they're educated that kind of education. Like in Iraq, for example, where I'm from, the population mostly is educated, but they're educated that kind of education that will not ever challenge.
I would say they're literate. They're literate, but they're not educated, and that is what I referred to also in the beginning when there's this report that was recently released by the Brookings Institution, particularly on that, and the literacy rate is going higher, the enrollment rate is going higher, people are going more to school, but the average student is not meeting the learning level or the learning threshold basically as compared to other schools. So we're going to school, but we're not learning or to make us good entrepreneurs or good citizens.
I also have a question for Ms. AbouZeid, but Adam and Bradley can jump in based on their research on the West.
Can you identify yourself, please?
My name is Javier Torres. I'm a Ecuadorian student at Hampshire College. But before that, I really wanted to commend you, Ms. AbouZeid, for your bravery, especially because we do need more entrepreneurs in the MENA region, but we need more women entrepreneurs especially, and we need more women in academic panels like these ones, so I want to commend you. So to my question, you mentioned the ecology that's missing in the MENA region to make an entrepreneurial mindset, and I was wondering, what was the one that you needed for you to be able to be inspired to make 3 startups? And maybe Bradley and I both jump in.
What I needed that didn't exist, or?
What was it that you had to have to inspire you?
I have to say that I needed people that I could go to. So I was lucky enough to go to the American University in Cairo and have professors that I can go to and ask certain questions. And even questions that are mostly related to the data. I never asked for people to encourage me. Actually, I was always discouraged. Like even when with Qabila, company, I had to wait until the company made its first $1 million in revenues to convince my parents to quit Google to go run my own startup. So I was always discouraged from basically going for the riskier option. But that was not what I was looking for. More than I was looking for sources of information. And the problem of lack of data is prevalent all throughout the MENA region on everything. Even when it comes to finding data on education, it's just very difficult. So that is something that I needed. I needed to find people, and I think that's something that can also be done now. I've seen in different schools promoting MIT as a school that I go to. Also, like there is a lot of entrepreneurship centers where people can actually go and find information that they need, and that is something that I think can be done for people. So here, for instance, you can very easily call and Delaware and incorporate a C Corp very quickly, but it took me about 4 or 5 months to know how to incorporate a company in Cairo. And that is something as simple as this. So I think having entrepreneurship centers can be something that can help entrepreneurs or in universities. Specifically universities, because if you do any research, you'll find that the majority of co-founders find each other in school, in college, and sometimes also in work, so they work together. So this is where it starts. This is where the first community starts, and this is where people can actually find the right information. So yeah.
So what you brought up with more women is precisely what WES, the organization I talked about, is trying to promote. But it's interesting moving the discussion towards the lack of data. That's actually something that WES is working on as part of becoming more sustainable and improving their business model. Is as they create more and more entrepreneurs who are women, they also make sure that they enter into the formal economy and that this data exists, and that basically they're creating a database of all these women entrepreneurs and trying to connect them to investors and to banks. So I think we need more organizations like WES in order to facilitate precisely what your question was about, which is more women in entrepreneurship.
I'll just add one quick thing. It's not just WES that needs the data. We met with the Microfinance Institute, and microfinance, for the most part, they're 97% of the loans, I think, are to women. And what WES is planning to provide is data on women, small business owners, so they have low-risk investors, people to get loans to. So that's something that was interesting also.
Actually, one thing I'd like to add on the gender disparity. So, interesting facts. Younger or women, basically, or girls, are enrolling less in schools, but they're learning better in schools in the MENA region. However, when they graduate, the women participation in the labor force, basically, participation rate is 24% versus 77% for men. That means that only 18% of women, young women, are actually working in the MENA region, and that raises a lot of questions on why women are not actually working in organizations like this. Actually can help with that. And entrepreneurship, I believe, actually helps a lot more because maybe working environments in organizations are not very women friendly, so it could be a lot better to become entrepreneurs basically.
Hi, my name is Adas Bergman. I'm from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and I represent Seeds of Peace. I'm an Israeli entrepreneur. I work for a startup company. And I actually wanted to ask you, Mrs. AbouZeid, also, and if maybe other people can answer as well, what do you think is the changes that are needed in the MENA region to allow for more entrepreneurship? As I think Mr. Spring, I don't remember his name, said that we need education and entrepreneurship to advance the economy. And I feel like after the Arab Spring, changing the education system to help entrepreneurship is the way. What kind of changes do you think are needed, and also to include women in the entrepreneurship process?
So I definitely believe it starts with education, but education reform takes so long, especially in a country like Egypt. So we cannot expect things to change, with the according. But one thing that we can do is that we can complement the educational system through civil societies, through again the engagement of the international communities, including expats as well. But I personally believe that there's one element of it has to do with capacity building, general skills like leadership, teamwork, creativity, and communication skills. That definitely has to be included. So learning tools, basically, in capacity building. There is, let's see here. Also, I believe that there should be an encouragement, like the investment funds, whatever they're government funds or even private sector funds, have to go towards projects or research projects that are going towards or to solve basically national problems, national challenges. So things that have to do with in certain countries, like that can create economic development or economic opportunities, agricultural projects, tourism, whatever it is, but things that basically can actually the investments to go towards that particular area. Let's see, I have a whole sort of model here that I built. But also I think the legal system also has to, the legal infrastructure has to be revamped when it comes to entrepreneurship. We have to find certain mechanisms that would help, will encourage more investors to come, and even local investors to come. We need to do something about IP laws, because there is nothing that protects any like copyrights at all. So people actually try. I'm personally one of the people, and out of so many people that actually came here to incorporate here because it's safer for our companies to exist, or our technologies to exist, and also support system in terms of promoting a lot of the success stories that are happening, creating communities, entrepreneurial communities. That helped me a lot here, and I think that has a lot to do with Silicon Valley. If people go to Silicon Valley, even here in Cambridge, people can actually feel that energy, and that encourages a lot of people to become entrepreneurs, and that is something that we don't have. And just on back to the point of capacity building, I think one of the things that can be done is just invest in things, simple things like sports and art and media, because I think that that also helps a lot. So when you think of Hollywood, they talk about what's called the CSI effect. So currently after CSI and all those like forensic shows, basically women are now more encouraged to pursue that kind of career, investigative career, just because it's become like sexy on TV. So and now there's organizations that are actually consulting Hollywood studios on how they can invest in making the same effect on science and technology, basically, so that we can encourage more women to be in science and technology. So something like numbers, the show numbers, and they're trying to measure if that actually affects something. So that can also be included in the Middle East.
Thank you, that was fascinating.
Hello, somewhat in a continuation. My name is Yotam. I'm also from the Seeds of Peace Delegation, Hebrew University, and involved in the Israeli high-tech entrepreneurial community. And this is also a question to Ms. AbouZeid. Somewhat also a continuation to Mr. Solzinger's video from before. So my question is well, given the opportunities for cross-border cooperation and a vision of the so-called startup nation being truly part of the META region, in your perspective, what is the viability of this vision, and what can be done today to promote this vision, especially given the ongoing conflict that is still a part of the reality we live in?
Do you want the diplomatic answer or the real answer?
Really possible.
I honestly believe that in a society that doesn't know what it means. Let me put it differently. So basically in the Middle East, when you have obviously like high literacy rate, but also high education, like general education or lack of rates, you cannot expect people to accept cross-border collaborations without them understanding what that means and what's in it for them. So we grow up in Egypt and across the Arab world, we grow up thinking of Israel as the enemy. So for me to shake hands with the enemy, what's in it for me is basic as an Egyptian, as a mainstream Egyptian, it means that I'm actually like sort of submitting to an enemy, and I'm giving up on my freedoms or giving up on my dignity or all those kind of things. So you need to start first with explaining what it is for the people. And it could be in subtle manners, like, again, back to media, I'm a bit biased because that's my background or my industry, but information, and always communicating it in what's in it for people. Then that is the only way that people can actually understand that there could be any form of collaboration. But when in a society where basically people don't understand that, you cannot expect. Technology definitely helps a lot. So all web-based technology specifically help a lot because the World Wide Web does not have citizenship, does not have a passport, so definitely everybody uses. A lot of people don't know, for instance, that Viber is an Israeli company and they use it. So so definitely technology can help, but again, there has to be a lot to do with education, understanding how that can impact people's lives.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jean-Louis Manato. I'm here at the Pleasure School. My question is for Katie and Bahar. I really appreciated the research you did, and I'm very intrigued by civil society in Tunisia and by a few things that you said. I came back from Libya, where for 2 years I researched and cooperated in developing civil society organizations. You say that the government dismissed civil society in Tunisia. And I wonder if you can help me understand this, because in reality, the state is not a kingmaker of civil society. People are. So I wonder if you saw some failures on behalf of civil society organizations, either because they had structural or operational challenges, or if they lacked the skills to address the broader constituency, such as public communication, or if they didn't find funding, or if they had fear. The state can certainly curtail civil society through regulations by a democracy. Short of that, fear would be created by other groups. In Libya, civil society organizations are afraid of extremists, and many have suffered directly or have left the country. The result has been that some sectors are under represented: advocacy, human rights monitoring, fighting corruption, things like this. So I would like to understand a little better what is behind the findings that you found.
I guess I'll just begin by saying that we only spent 10 days in Tunisia, so we have very limited experience. But maybe dismiss was a harsh word. I think rather than explicit and active dismissal of the sector altogether, what we found was that while youth were strengthening civil society through these nonprofits and through their universities, there wasn't a venue or a channel in which they could then bring what they had learned or created in these civil society organizations into the government. And so while government officials would reference, say, the youth of the revolution in their electoral speeches and try to engage them in that way, it was a very surface level engagement in that they were only trying to garner votes, and then there wouldn't be any opportunities for youth to voice their opinions and the challenges they had in the traditional government. So maybe rather than like an active dismissal, it was more of there just wasn't a venue for the two sort of sectors to come together for the one goal.
Yeah, I guess just adding on to what Bahar said, we found that funding was a very large part of why a lot of civil society organizations failed. There was just not enough of it.
Thank you.
My name is James Nadell. I'm from the World Affairs Council of Boston and am an EPIIC alumnus. I'll direct my question to Mr. Khreisat. For the purposes of bringing some of these educational opportunities that we've been talking about to the most disadvantaged youths in the MENA region, the U.S. government spends a lot of money bringing foreign mid-career professionals to visit the U.S. and Fulbright scholarships. Are those relevant to the most disadvantaged youth? Is it useful to try and bring them here for a full college education? Or do they really require more specific and local solutions and local capacity building?
The thing related to the, especially in the Middle East, we have a problem with the language. So if you will have a disadvantaged kid that he has the basic education in Arabic, or maybe he don't have that, to go to a different country to start a diploma or something like this, maybe this will be a challenge. But I think we can work on developing the teachers and develop the people that they can transfer this education to the kids by give them the training of trainers and help them to achieve by expand their knowledge for and the new experiences to those marginalized people.
I think anyone could really answer my question if they feel like they are qualified to. So my question is that, do you see this promotion of entrepreneurship as a sustainable model for decreasing unemployment? A lot of times startups, you can have a lot of them, but even so, they don't necessarily employ so many people. It's not like a manufacturing industry or something that can employ thousands and thousands of people with one plant. So my question is this the solution for reducing unemployment in the Middle East and North Africa, or is this just one part of a greater solution?
So I would actually break unemployment into two different parts or types of unemployment. So I would ask, are the people that are unemployed, are they unemployed because they're not employable, or is it because they are employable but they don't have, there is no opportunity? And there's a clear distinction here because, again, back to the whole learning thing, there's a lot, we have a lot of hundreds of thousands of students who graduate from college every year, but they don't have the proper skills to be employed anywhere. And there is a lot of efforts by the IC specifically, but also a lot of other organizations that are working with the private sector into basically providing programs that can give the students the proper skills that make them employable. But also the people that have these skills but they can't find the opportunity, that is sort of a smaller percentage, because usually people that have the skills get work except in certain sort of fields, like mostly in science and technologies, and even in medicine as well. So like pharmacists, for instance, can't find, they graduate with good knowledge, good skills, but there is not enough responsibility and not enough opportunities. They end up being medical representatives or sales representatives. So that is when again, like entrepreneurship opportunities can become the right solution. But again, the problem is that we're promoting entrepreneurship. We're not creating this safe and proper environment for entrepreneurs to rise on their own. So a businessman competition, I'll give you an example. One of the biggest and most prestigious businessman competitions in the Middle East is the MIT Enterprise Forum competition. Over 4,000 applications are submitted every year. About 500 of those, based on their reports, are actually good, legitimate business plans. But only 3 people win, and the rest, the 497, end up either going home, or they try to start, on their own, but they don't find the proper sort of support system that can help them. So that doesn't make entrepreneurship a valid solution anymore, because most probably, and I'm one of them, most probably the people that win are the ones that have acquired the proper skills elsewhere. So it's not the competition that made that basically helpful. And I'm sad to find that all the funds of the USAID or the State Department funds to promote entrepreneurship, as you know, based on President Obama's speech in Cairo in 2008, are mostly going towards those programs or startup weekends, where basically people, just go beyond the ideation phase or just stop there. So I personally believe that all the other solutions that I talked about earlier need to be in place, and we need to start from universities. We need to create entrepreneurship centers that can create a lot of capacity building programs in colleges and invest a lot in research that's related to national interest, in order to entrepreneurship become a really valid and viable solution.
I can also share some lights here. I feel that entrepreneurship can, on the one hand, can solve the unemployment, and on the other hand, it requires a very good social security system, which means including the pension and the education subsidy. So without a very good social security, the young people will be reluctant to give up their job with a very fixed salary and to take the risk and run their own business. So I do feel it's important for the government to strike out a balance between you taking this measure to solve the employment and also to secure people's basic incomes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you to all my panelists and the student researchers. I hope everyone in the audience enjoyed the presentations. Thank you for your endurance throughout this weekend. And so the last panel, so Sherman.
The base. As they would say in primary politics, the base is here. You guys, the 100 or so people here represent the core of EPIIC and our international delegations and others. I think this panel is the most appropriate panel to end on. I hope that Inger's keynote gave us a bit of optimism to go out on. The World Bank is offering these internships. They have met with our president, Tony Monaco. We're working out those modalities. I told you to spruce up, and then came the reality that they couldn't fly out. They had to rearrange their time to take a train. It's a 6-hour train ride to Washington. So if you're disappointed, imagine them for 6 hours on the train. I can assure you this is going to happen. And there are many other opportunities. But looking at this panel is really the thrust of where I hope the future lies. I am hoping to meet with Seeds after this because I helped create that curriculum, and I know the difficulties of being a Seeds alumnus. I know the difficulty of reintegrating into communities that are suspicious, and I know the difficulties that we are speaking about here in terms of trans-border, transnational collaborations, those sorts of concerns. And we're trying to figure out with the Carnegie funds how to potentially create joint research projects between students here and our own students, I mean the international students here and our own students. I think your presentation, immediately you sort of present a vision of somebody from China studying in Israel, learning a language, hoping to work with somebody who's hoping to extend innovation in a regional peaceful overture. I mean, that's a lovely paradigm, which maybe we can somehow figure out how to invigorate. We, through the Empower program of the Institute and through our Poverty and Power Research Initiative, which you saw something of when our wonderful students presented on looking at cash and assistance in the refugee camps, are just some of the funnels for which we can possibly work. In any case, it's been a rewarding, I hope, week, full, intensive time, and I can only say how grateful I am to all of you for being here, to the international delegations, the people joining us from the 5 colleges. I know that next year we're planning with Russia, with Kurt Lang, at least in Mount Holyoke, to think about a real true synergy. The Carnegie Corporation is interested in us creating a consortium. So if you saw the enthusiastic response of Dick Burns, that represents Harvard, Belfour is going to be seriously involved. Those of you who came to the Russian session planning for next year realize that we're going to be looking at cyber and working with the Belfour Center for Science and Technology, looking at all kinds of security considerations. There's so much ahead of us. And given what's going on out in the world right now, and Dick helped us create that fusion, you have a sense of what next year is going to look like for EPIIC 2014-15. I am very interested, and I'm sure our students are as well, in creating a community that really is a human community. The vitality here is not simply intellectual or academic. The vitality here is based upon respect for each other and people, individuals, creating that kind of community. And I think you saw some of this in the context of people coming back. Mr. Nadell, Jim, when did you graduate?
I graduated Tufts in 2009.
2009?
Yes.
And what year were you EPIIC?
2007.
2007. And there are others here, Daniela, I mean, just there's a range of people, Shauna, etc. There is a community, and we need to figure out how to prosper it. But again, to our teaching assistants, to Alex and Olivia, who really are preparing our students for their resumes and their overtures and cover letters as we move forward, and from the mentoring. We're future-oriented, guys, and just to all of you, a warm embrace, and to our panelists, thank you, and for everybody's patience, thank you very, very much to our board, to Ted Mayer, to the Carnegie, to the Taiwan Foundation, to Seoul National University in South Korea, which has given funds to allow some of the international students to be here, and on and on. There's so much that we have to be grateful for. Please look at the acknowledgments, take a look at what's been accomplished, and have a lovely party this evening. Bye, guys.